Search team to base. We found the tent. Over.
Copy. Condition of the tent. Over.
It's been cut open from the inside. They cut their way out. Over.
What? Are they nearby? Over.
Negative. Footprints lead down the mountain. Barefoot. Some in socks only. In this cold, they had maybe 15 minutes before... Wait. Base, we found something. Oh, God. I need to...
February 1st, 1959. The Ural Mountains, Soviet Union. 9 experienced hikers, university students and recent graduates, set up camp on the slopes of a mountain called Kolet-Syakhl. In the local Mansi language, the name means dead mountain. They would never leave. What happened next has baffled investigators for over 60 years. Sometime that night, something terrified these experienced outdoorsmen so badly that they cut through their own tent from the inside. In the middle of a blizzard. At temperatures of -30 degrees Celsius -22 degrees Fahrenheit. They fled downhill in their underwear and socks. No coats. No boots. No supplies. Running from something. When rescue teams found them weeks later, the scene was beyond comprehension. 2 bodies near a makeshift fire, frozen to death. 3 bodies on the slope, seemingly trying to crawl back to the tent. And 4 bodies in a ravine, buried under 4 meters of snow. But it was the condition of these last 4 bodies that would haunt investigators forever. One had massive chest trauma, ribs crushed with a force equivalent to a car crash, but no external injuries. Another had her skull fractured, also with no external wounds. One was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her face. Another was missing his eyes. Their clothes showed traces of radioactive contamination. The Soviet government investigated for months, then suddenly closed the case. The official conclusion: death by unknown compelling natural force. The case files were classified for decades. When they were finally released in the 1990s, they raised more questions than answers. What happened on Dead Mountain? What could terrify experienced hikers so badly they'd run to certain death? Why were there no external injuries despite massive internal trauma? Where did the radiation come from? And why did the Soviet government bury this case for 40 years? This is Cold Case Dossier, file number 004. The Dyatlov Pass Incident. 9 experienced hikers. 1 impossible mystery. 0 survivors to tell the story. To understand what makes the Dyatlov Pass incident so baffling, you first need to understand who these hikers were. They weren't inexperienced tourists. They weren't reckless teenagers. They were some of the Soviet Union's best outdoorsmen and women. Igor Alexeyevich Dyatlov, age 23. Igor Dyatlov was the group's leader and the person the incident would eventually be named after. A 5th-year student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk, now Ekaterinburg, Igor was studying radio engineering. But his true passion was hiking. Igor had led multiple expeditions through the Urals and was known for his meticulous planning and safety consciousness. Friends described him as serious, responsible, and deeply knowledgeable about wilderness survival. Igor would never take unnecessary risks, one classmate later said. He checked every detail twice. He was obsessed with safety. Igor was tall, athletic, with dark hair and an intense gaze. He rarely smiled in photographs, he took everything seriously, especially his responsibilities as a leader. For months before the expedition, Igor had been planning this specific route. The goal: to reach Otorten Mountain, about 200 kilometers north of Sverdlovsk. It was classified as a Category 3 expedition, the most difficult rating. Only experienced hikers with proven skills were allowed to attempt it. Igor had hand-picked his team carefully. Zina Alexievna Kalmogorova, age 22. Zina was a fourth-year student, also at the Ural Polytechnic Institute, studying radio engineering like Igor. She was beautiful, intelligent, and fiercely independent, unusual qualities for a Soviet woman in the 1950s. Zina had been on multiple expeditions before and was considered one of the most skilled hikers in the group. She was particularly good at navigation and orienteering. Friends said Zina and Igor had a complicated relationship, possibly romantic, though neither ever confirmed it publicly. They were close, that much was clear. Zina kept detailed diaries, meticulously documenting every expedition. Her final diary entries would later be analyzed for any clue about what happened. Luda Alexandrovna Dubinina, age 20. Luda was the youngest woman in the group and perhaps the most experienced hiker despite her age. She'd been on numerous difficult expeditions and had earned respect from male hikers, which was rare in 1950s Soviet society. Luda was studying economics but spent most of her free time hiking. She was known for her optimism, her singing voice, and her ability to keep morale high during difficult stretches. Luda could make everyone laugh even when we were freezing and exhausted, a friend recalled. She kept a journal during the expedition, filling it with poetry, songs, and observations about the landscape. Her final entries were cheerful, excited about reaching their destination. Alexander Kolya Sergeyevich Kolevatov, age 24. Kolya was older than most of the group and had already graduated from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. He worked as a meteorologist and had extensive wilderness experience. Kolya was quiet, thoughtful, and incredibly strong physically. He could carry heavier loads than anyone else and seemed immune to cold and fatigue. Friends described him as the group's silent guardian, always watching out for others, rarely speaking unless he had something important to say. Rustam Vladimirovich Slobodin, age 23. Rustam was Igor's close friend and assistant leader of the expedition. He was studying engineering and had been on multiple Category 3 expeditions before. Rustam was known for his sense of humor and his guitar playing. He often entertained the group around campfires with songs and jokes. But he was also serious about safety and supported Igor in all planning decisions. Yuri Georgy Alexievich Krivoniskenko, age 23. Georgy was studying engineering and had been hiking with Igor's group for years. He was close friends with everyone in the group and served as the expedition's photographer, documenting their journey with a camera. Georgy was outgoing, funny, and had a talent for diffusing tensions when group dynamics got difficult. He loved the wilderness and talked constantly about the beauty of the Ural Mountains. Yuri Nikolaevich Doroshenko, age 21. Yuri Doroshenko was studying economics and was one of the group's strongest members. Despite being younger than some others, he had extensive hiking experience. Yuri was known for being practical and good with his hands. He could repair equipment, build shelters, and solve mechanical problems. Nikolai Kolya Vladimirovich Thibault-Brignoles, age 23. Kolya Thibault-Brignoles had an unusual name for a Soviet citizen. His grandfather had been a French prisoner of war who stayed in Russia. He was studying engineering and had been hiking seriously for 5 years. Kolya was physically powerful, known for his endurance and his ability to hike long distances without complaining. Semyon Alexander Alexievich Zolotaryov, age 37. Semyon was by far the oldest member of the group and something of a mystery. He was a World War II veteran who had fought at Stalingrad and received multiple military decorations. After the war, Semyon had become a passionate hiker, joining university hiking clubs despite not being a student himself. He was worldly, experienced, and told stories about his war service that captivated the younger group members. Semyon had only joined this particular expedition at the last minute, replacing another hiker who got sick. Some group members barely knew him. This detail would later fuel speculation about his role in what happened. The 10th hiker, Yuri Yudin. There was actually a 10th person who started the expedition, Yuri Yudin, age 21. Yuri was Igor's close friend and an experienced hiker. But on January 28, just a few days into the trek, Yuri developed severe back pain and knee problems. After consulting with the group, it was decided Yuri would turn back. This decision saved his life. Yuri said goodbye to his friends on January 28 and began the journey back to civilization. It was the last time he would see any of them alive. Yuri would spend the rest of his life. He died in 2013, trying to understand what happened to his friends. He became one of the most vocal advocates for reopening the investigation. The expertise factor. This detail is crucial to understanding why the Dyatlov Pass incident is so mysterious. These weren't amateurs. Collectively, the group had decades of hiking experience. They'd survived blizzards, avalanches, and extreme cold before. They knew how to build shelters, start fires in any conditions, and navigate by stars. They had the proper equipment: skis, warm clothes, a sturdy tent, food supplies, and tools. They were physically fit, mentally prepared, and led by one of the most safety-conscious hikers in the Soviet Union. Whatever happened to them wasn't the result of inexperience or poor planning. That's what makes it so terrifying. On January 23, 1959, the 10 hikers departed from Sverdlovsk by train. Their destination, Otorten Mountain, about 200 kilometers north. The plan was to ski and hike through the northern Ural Mountains, a journey expected to take about 2 weeks. They would document their route with photographs and journals, and Igor would send a telegram to the sports club when they returned. The expected return date was February 12, 1959. From the train, they transferred to a truck that took them to Vizhai, the last inhabited settlement before the wilderness. Vizhai was a small logging village inhabited primarily by indigenous Mansi people. The group spent the night there, resting and making final preparations. On January 27, they began skiing north into the wilderness. The weather was cold but clear. Spirits were high. Photographs from the early days show the group smiling, joking, building campfires. Zena's diary entries are optimistic. January 27, clear day. Temperature about -17 degrees Celsius. We're making good progress. Everyone is in good spirits. The Urals are beautiful. January 28, Yuri Yudin is turning back due to pain. We're all sad to see him go, but he made the right decision. We continue north. Igor says we're on schedule. After Yuri left, the remaining 9 continued deeper into the wilderness. For the next few days, the expedition proceeded normally. They hiked during the day, set up camp at night, ate meals together, sang songs. Georgie's photographs show stunning landscapes, endless snow, dense forests, mountains looming in the distance. The group looked happy, healthy, confident. On January 31, the weather began to deteriorate. Snow fell heavily. Wind picked up. Temperature dropped. But this wasn't unusual for the region, and the group was prepared. They made camp and waited for the storm to pass. That evening, gathered in their tent, they wrote in their journals and played games. Luda wrote poetry. Rustam played guitar. Semyon told war stories. Everything seemed fine. On February 1st, the group woke to continuing poor weather. They had a choice: wait another day for conditions to improve, or push forward. Igor decided they should continue. They were experienced enough to hike in these conditions, and they were on a schedule. The group packed up and began skiing toward their next campsite. Their route took them up the slopes of Kholat Syakhl, Dead Mountain. This was a barren, exposed area with no trees, just snow-covered slopes. The plan was to cross the slope, then descend into a valley where they'd camp in the shelter of the forest. But as the day wore on, conditions worsened. Wind strengthened. Visibility dropped. Snow fell heavily. By late afternoon, Igor made a decision. Instead of descending into the valley as planned, they would camp on the mountain slope. This was unusual. Experienced hikers don't camp on exposed slopes if they can avoid it. But perhaps Igor felt the group was too tired to continue, or visibility was too poor to navigate the descent safely. Around 5 p.m., they began setting up camp. They found a relatively flat area on the slope and pitched their tent. The tent was a large, custom-made structure that could accommodate all 9 hikers. They anchored it with ski poles and piled snow around the edges to block wind. Inside, they laid out sleeping bags, organized supplies, and prepared dinner. Photographs from that evening show the group inside the tent, cramped but comfortable. Someone, probably Georgie, took a picture that would become one of the last images of the group alive. It shows several hikers in the tent, some sitting, some lying down, all appearing relaxed. In one image, Semyon is visible playing a mandolin. In another, Luda and Zina are sitting close together, talking. Nothing in these photos suggests fear or concern. Just a group of friends on a camping trip, waiting out bad weather. They ate dinner, likely some kind of dried meat, bread, and hot tea. They sang songs, told jokes, wrote in their journals. Outside, the wind howled and snow fell, but inside the tent it was relatively warm and dry. At some point, everyone settled into their sleeping bags for the night. The tent had a small stove for heating, but it's unclear if they used it that night. Some sleeping bags were positioned near the tent entrance, others toward the back. Igor, as leader, likely positioned himself near the entrance. And then they slept. This was the last normal moment of their lives. Sometime that night, investigators would later estimate between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., something happened. Something so terrifying that these 9 experienced hikers did the unthinkable. They cut through their tent from the inside. Using knives, they slashed the tent fabric in multiple places, creating large openings. Then they fled. In their socks and underwear. Into the night. Into the blizzard. Into temperatures of -30 degrees Celsius. Down the mountain slope, leaving footprints in the snow. Running from something. Or running toward something. We'll never know which. Because none of them survived to tell the story. February 12, 1959. The Dyatlov group was scheduled to send a telegram from Vizhai indicating their safe return. The telegram never came. Initially, this didn't cause immediate alarm. It was common for expeditions to run a few days late due to weather or route changes. The sports club at the Ural Polytechnic Institute decided to wait a few more days before worrying. But families were concerned. Parents called the university asking about their children. By February 15, 3 days past the expected return, it was clear something was wrong. The university contacted authorities. On February 16, a volunteer search team was organized. Fellow students and experienced hikers gathered equipment and prepared to search the route. By February 17, the search team had reached Vizhai and begun moving north, following the Dyatlov group's known route. On February 20, the Soviet government escalated the response. Military helicopters were deployed. Professional search and rescue teams were mobilized. Police investigator Lev Nikitic Ivanov was assigned to lead the investigation. Ivanov was an experienced investigator, but nothing in his career had prepared him for what he would find. On February 26, 1959, nearly 4 weeks after the incident, a search team found the Dyatlov group's tent. The location was on the slopes of Kholat Syakhl, exactly where Igor had planned to camp. But the condition of the tent was shocking. It was still standing, partially buried by snow. But it had been cut open from the inside, multiple slashes in the fabric, clearly made by knives. Inside the tent, everything was still there. All 9 backpacks. Food supplies. Extra clothes and boots. Cameras and journals. Flashlights. Skis. Nothing had been taken. It was as if the group had simply vanished mid-activity. Sleeping bags were laid out, some still occupied looking, as if people had been inside them moments before. Food was prepared but uneaten. Cameras were loaded with film but not fully used. Outside the tent, investigators found footprints. 8 or 9 sets of footprints leading downhill, away from the tent. Some footprints were barefoot. Others showed socks. A few showed single boots. But most were barefoot or nearly barefoot. The footprints suggested people walking, not running in panic, but moving with purpose downhill. They walked in a relatively organized line, suggesting they stayed together as a group initially. The footprints were preserved in the snow, protected from wind by a layer of ice that had formed over them. They led down the slope toward a forest about 1.5 kilometers away. Search teams followed the footprints. About 1,500 meters from the tent, at the edge of the forest, they found the first bodies. The first discovery, February 27. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivoniskenko were found together near a large cedar tree. Both were dead, frozen solid. Both were dressed only in underwear. Their hands were badly burned, as if they'd been trying to warm themselves by fire. Indeed, searchers found evidence of a small fire beneath the cedar tree, charred branches and ash. But the fire had gone out, and the 2 men had frozen to death beside it. The cedar tree itself showed something strange. Branches had been broken off up to 5 meters high, as if someone had been climbing the tree. Why would someone climb a tree in a blizzard while freezing to death? To get a better view of something? To escape from something? The tree was on a direct sight line to the tent, about 1.5 kilometers away. From the top of the tree, you could see the tent location. The second discovery, March 1. Between the cedar tree and the tent, searchers found 3 more bodies. Igor Dyatlov was found about 300 meters from the cedar tree, face down in the snow. He was positioned as if he'd been trying to crawl back toward the tent. Zinaida Kolmogorova was found about 630 meters from the cedar, also positioned as if crawling toward the tent. Rustam Slobodin was found about 480 meters from the cedar, in a similar position. All 3 were more clothed than the first 2 victims but still inadequately dressed for the cold. Igor was wearing a sleeveless shirt and pants but no coat or boots. Zina was wearing a sweater, pants, and one ski boot. Rustam was similarly dressed. All three had frozen to death. Their position suggested they'd been trying to return to the tent, perhaps to get warmer clothes or supplies. But they hadn't made it. The cold had killed them before they could reach safety. Medical examinations showed. All 5 bodies showed signs of severe hypothermia. No significant external injuries. No signs of struggle or violence. Time of death estimated at 6 to 8 hours after their last meal, placing death around 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. 5 bodies found. 4 still missing. Where were the others? The third discovery, May 4th. It took over 2 more months to find the remaining 4 bodies. Why so long? Because they were buried under 4 meters of snow in a ravine about 75 meters from the cedar tree. The ravine had been filling with snow throughout February and March, completely concealing the bodies. Only when spring thaw began did searchers finally locate them. On May 4, 1959, searchers found the bodies of Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, Semyon Zolotaryov. All 4 had been lying in a small stream at the bottom of the ravine. They were better dressed than the other 5 victims. In fact, some were wearing clothes that had been cut from the bodies of the 2 Yuris found at the cedar tree. This suggested that after the 2 Yuris died, the surviving group members had stripped clothes from the dead to stay warm. A grim but logical survival decision. But it was the condition of these 4 bodies that would transform this from a tragic hiking accident into one of history's greatest mysteries. The autopsies of the 9 victims were conducted by Dr. Boris Vozrozdeny, a forensic pathologist. What he found defied explanation. The first 5 bodies, Igor, Zina, Rustam, and the 2 Yuris. These 5 had died from hypothermia, as expected. External examination showed severe frostbite on hands and feet. Some superficial cuts and bruises, consistent with hiking through forest in darkness. Rustam had a small skull fracture, but it was determined to be non-fatal and possibly from falling. The 2 Yuris at the cedar tree had burned hands from attempting to restart the fire. Nothing particularly unusual. Sad, but explicable. It was the last 4 bodies, those found in the ravine, that changed everything. Lyudmila Dubinina. Luda's autopsy revealed catastrophic injuries. Massive chest trauma, multiple ribs broken on both sides, ribs 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the right side, ribs 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on the left side. No external injuries. Despite the massive internal damage, there were no bruises, cuts, or marks on her skin. Missing tongue, eyes, and part of facial tissue. Her tongue had been removed, along with the soft tissue of her mouth. Both eyes were missing. Parts of her facial tissue were gone. Dr. Vozrozdeny noted, the force required to cause this chest trauma would be similar to a car crash. But there are no external injuries whatsoever. This is highly unusual. Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles. Kolya's autopsy revealed massive skull fracture. His skull was fractured with enough force to cause brain damage. No external injuries. Despite the skull fracture, there was no bleeding, bruising, or marks on the skin. No signs of being struck. The fracture pattern didn't match being hit by an object. Dr. Vozrozdeny noted, the skull fracture is consistent with extreme pressure but shows no signs of external impact. Alexander Kolevatov. Kolya's body showed. Missing eyes, both eyes were gone, sockets empty. Deformed neck, soft tissue damage to the neck. Less severe but similar internal injuries to the others. Semyon Zolotaryov. Semyon's body showed. Massive chest trauma, multiple broken ribs, similar to Luda. No external injuries, no bruising or marks despite the internal damage. Extensive internal bleeding. Dr. Vozrozdeny wrote in his report. The chest injuries of Dubinina and Zolotaryov are extremely unusual. The force required would have to be immense, like being hit by a car at high speed. Yet there are absolutely no external injuries, no bruising, no cuts. I have never seen anything like this in 30 years of forensic pathology. The medical mystery. How do you cause massive internal trauma without any external injuries? Modern forensic experts have a few possible explanations. 1. Barotrauma, pressure injury. This occurs when there's a sudden, massive change in pressure, like an explosion or avalanche. The pressure wave can cause internal injuries without leaving external marks. 2. Compression. If someone is compressed between two surfaces, like being caught in an avalanche, the pressure can crush internal organs without breaking the skin. 3. Postmortem damage. Some injuries could have occurred after death, water pressure in the stream, decomposition, scavenging animals. But Dr. Vozrozdeny was adamant. These injuries occurred while the victims were alive. The bleeding patterns prove this. And the specific nature of the injuries, particularly the missing tongue and eyes, cannot be explained by post-mortem processes alone. The missing tongue and eyes. This detail has become the most haunting aspect of the case. Luda was missing her tongue, the floor of her mouth, and both eyes. Kolya was missing both eyes. 3 possible explanations. 1. Scavenging. After death, animals or decomposition could remove soft tissue. The tongue and eyes are among the first parts to decompose or be eaten by scavengers. But counter-argument, the bodies were in freezing water. Decomposition would be minimal. And what animals would be active in that environment? 2. Removal before death. Someone or something cut out the tongue and eyes. But why? And how? And by whom? 3. Self-inflicted during panic. Some theorists suggest the victims bit through their own tongues during extreme trauma or panic. But medical experts dismiss this. Biting through your entire tongue is almost impossible. The radiation. Testing revealed radioactive contamination on some clothing items. Specifically, Semyon Zolotaryov's clothing showed elevated radiation levels. Luda Dubinina's clothing also showed contamination. The contamination was on specific items, not uniformly distributed. Levels were elevated but not immediately life-threatening. In the Soviet Union of 1959, there were several potential sources of radiation. Nuclear weapons testing, the Soviets were conducting tests in the general region. Industrial contamination, some group members worked with radioactive materials. Military experiments. But why would only some clothing items be contaminated? And why these specific group members? The skin color. Several witnesses who saw the bodies noted unusual skin coloration. Deep tan or orange tint. Some described it as mahogany-colored. Most prominent on the last 4 victims found in the ravine. Possible explanations. Chemical contamination. Radiation exposure. Post-mortem changes due to being in water. frostbite and tissue damage. Dr. Vozrozdeny's conclusions. The official autopsy reports concluded 5 victims died from hypothermia. 4 victims died from a combination of hypothermia and massive internal trauma. The internal trauma was caused by an unknown compelling natural force. That phrase, unknown compelling natural force, would become infamous. What natural force causes massive internal injuries without external marks? What natural force removes tongues and eyes? What natural force leaves radioactive contamination? Dr. Vozrozdeny couldn't explain it. And 65 years later, we still can't agree on the answer. Lead investigator Lev Ivanov conducted an extensive investigation in the months following the discovery of the bodies. His team interviewed over 200 witnesses, examined all physical evidence, reviewed photographs and journals, conducted multiple site inspections, consulted with medical, forensic, and military experts. But the investigation was plagued by problems from the start. The Soviet factor. This wasn't just any investigation. This was a Soviet investigation in 1959. The Cold War was at its peak. Stalin had died only 6 years earlier. The Soviet system was secretive, paranoid, and controlling. Several factors complicated the investigation. 1. Military involvement. The area where the incident occurred was close to a Soviet military installation. The military had conducted weapons tests in the region. When military officials learned about the investigation, they became involved. Some witnesses later claimed they were told not to discuss certain aspects of the case. 2. Classified information. Portions of the investigation were classified immediately. Investigators were told certain details couldn't be shared publicly. Even investigator Ivanov wasn't allowed to access all information. 3. Political pressure. The Soviet government wanted a conclusion, fast. An unsolved mystery made the state look incompetent. Theories involving military accidents or weapons tests couldn't be pursued because admitting such things would embarrass the government. The investigation process. Despite these constraints, Ivanov tried to conduct a thorough investigation. Examining the tent. The tent was removed from the mountain and examined in detail. Key findings. 9 sets of footprints led away from the tent. All footprints were accounted for, no unknown individuals. The tent had been cut from the inside, using knives found inside the tent. The cuts were deliberate, not frantic slashing. Personal belongings were left behind, including valuables. This ruled out robbery or attack by other humans. If attackers had caused the hikers to flee, the footprints would show it. Examining the route. Investigators retraced the path from the tent to where the bodies were found. The footprints showed. The group stayed together initially. They walked, not ran, downhill. They were purposefully heading toward the forest. At some point, the group split up. Why walk instead of run? If they were fleeing in terror, you'd expect running, panicked footprints. The measured pace suggested either. They weren't fleeing from immediate danger but rather from some persistent threat. They were in some kind of trance or altered mental state. They knew they couldn't return to the tent and were trying to reach safety elsewhere. Interviewing witnesses. Ivanov's team interviewed the Mansi people. Indigenous locals suggested the area was cursed. That mountain is forbidden, one elder said. 9 deaths is a warning. But the Mansi had no motive to harm the hikers, and their whereabouts during the relevant time were accounted for. Other hiking groups. Several other expeditions were in the region around the same time. One group reported seeing strange lights in the sky on the night of February 1st. They described orange/yellow spheres moving through the night sky. This testimony would later fuel UFO theories. Military personnel. Soldiers stationed at nearby installations were questioned. Most claimed no knowledge of any unusual activity. But some made cryptic statements that suggested they knew more than they were allowed to say. One soldier reportedly told an investigator, "There are things we're not permitted to discuss." Scientists and technicians. Experts in various fields were consulted. Meteorologists analyzed weather conditions. Geologists examined the terrain. Military weapons experts reviewed the injuries. Radiation specialists tested the clothing. Each expert ruled out their respective specialties as the cause. Not weather. Not terrain. Not conventional weapons. Not radiation poisoning. The theories Ivanov investigated. Throughout the investigation, Ivanov explored numerous theories. Theory 1, Avalanche. An avalanche could explain the massive trauma, being buried/crushed. The need to cut out of the tent quickly. The panic that caused them to flee. But problems. The tent was still standing when found. The slope angle wasn't steep enough for avalanches. Experienced hikers would recognize avalanche danger. The footprints showed orderly walking, not panicked fleeing. The injuries, particularly missing tongue/eyes, don't match avalanche trauma. Ivanov investigated this extensively but ultimately rejected it. Theory 2, Infrasound-induced panic. Certain weather conditions can create low-frequency sound waves that cause feelings of dread and panic. Disorientation. Irrational behavior. This could explain why they fled the tent. But problems. Doesn't explain the physical injuries. Doesn't explain the radiation. Highly speculative. Ivanov noted this possibility but found no evidence. Theory 3, Military accident. Perhaps the military was conducting tests, weapons, rockets, or aircraft, and accidentally hit or frightened the hikers. This could explain the government's secrecy. Reintenter. M. Continuer. The radiation on the clothing. The massive internal trauma, from a blast wave or pressure weapon. The strange lights witnessed by other hikers. But problems. No debris from weapons or aircraft was found. The military denied any activity in that area on that date. The injury patterns don't match known weapons. Ivanov suspected this theory might be correct but was prevented from investigating it fully. He later stated in interviews after the fall of the Soviet Union that he believed military involvement was possible but was ordered not to pursue it. Theory 4, Criminal attack. Perhaps the hikers were attacked by criminals, escaped prisoners, bandits, or others. But problems. No footprints other than the hikers. Nothing stolen, valuables left in tent. The injury patterns don't match an attack by humans with weapons. No motive. Ivanov ruled this out quickly. Theory 5, Mansi attack. Some suggested the indigenous Mansi people attacked the group for trespassing on sacred land. But problems. The Mansi had no history of violence against hikers. Their whereabouts were accounted for. No Mansi tracks at the scene. The Monsi had no weapons capable of causing the observed injuries. Monsi witnesses were helpful and concerned, not suspicious. Ivanov dismissed this theory entirely. The strange lights. One aspect of the investigation that particularly interested Ivanov was the testimony about lights in the sky. Multiple witnesses, including other hiking groups and residents of nearby villages, reported seeing unusual aerial phenomena on or around February 1, 1959. Descriptions included orange/yellow glowing spheres moving rapidly across the sky, appearing and disappearing, multiple objects moving in formation. One witness statement from student hiking group member Yuri Yakimov. On February 1, around 11 p.m., we saw a bright light in the northern sky. It was moving from south to north, then suddenly changed direction. It left a trail of light behind it. We watched it for several minutes before it disappeared behind the mountains. We all agreed it was very strange, not like anything we'd seen before. Ivanov took these testimonies seriously. He noted in his files, the presence of unusual aerial phenomena in the area at the time of the incident cannot be ignored. But he was ordered not to include this information in his official report. The radiation mystery. The discovery of radioactive contamination on some clothing items was deeply troubling. Testing was conducted by experts from multiple institutions. Results. Semyon Zolotaryov's brown sweater showed beta radiation at levels 9,900 counts per minute, background is 100. Luda Dubanina's clothing showed similar elevated levels. Other clothing items showed normal background radiation. The contamination was concentrated in specific areas, not uniform. Possible sources investigated. 1. Occupation exposure. Some group members worked in laboratories or facilities where radioactive materials were present. Could they have carried contamination on their clothing? But counter-argument, why only certain items? Why not all clothing? 2. Military source. If there was a weapons test or accident, radiation could have been released. But counter-argument, other clothing showed no contamination. The pattern doesn't match weapons testing. 3. Natural sources. Certain minerals in the region are slightly radioactive. But counter-argument, the levels found were higher than natural background. 4. Contamination after death. Could the clothing have been contaminated during the investigation or testing process? But counter-argument, protocols were in place to prevent this. The radiation remained unexplained. Ivanov's frustration. As the investigation progressed, Ivanov became increasingly frustrated. He felt pressure from above to conclude the case quickly. He was denied access to certain information. He was told not to pursue certain lines of inquiry. In his personal notes, later made public, Ivanov wrote, "I am convinced that there is more to this case than I am being allowed to investigate. The evidence points to an unusual event, possibly involving military activity. But I am being prevented from pursuing this. I fear we will never know the full truth." The official conclusion. On May 28, 1959, investigator Lev Ivanov closed the case. His official conclusion. The cause of death of the Dyatlov group was the result of an unknown compelling natural force which they were unable to overcome. He noted that there was no evidence of criminal activity and no living culprits to prosecute. Therefore, the case was closed. The case files were classified and moved to a secret archive. They would remain hidden for decades. Families of the victims were given minimal information. The Soviet press was instructed not to report on the incident in detail. The area where the incident occurred was declared off-limits to hikers for 3 years. And for the next 40 years, the Dyatlov Pass incident remained largely unknown outside of Russia. Ivanov's later statements. After the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, Ivanov gave several interviews about the case. He was elderly and had retired from police work decades earlier. In a 1990 interview, he stated, "I can now say what I couldn't say before. I believe the hikers encountered something related to military testing. I was ordered not to investigate this angle. The radiation, the strange lights, the unusual injuries, they all point to something beyond a natural disaster. But I was told to close the case and classify it." In another interview shortly before his death in 1993, Ivanov said, "The truth is in those classified files. But I don't think they will ever be fully released. There are secrets the military still doesn't want revealed. Access to case files." In 1990, after the Soviet Union began opening archives, portions of the Dyatlov case file were released. Researchers and journalists gained access to autopsy reports, investigation notes, photographs from the scene, witness testimony, physical evidence descriptions. But many documents remained classified. Radiation test details, military activity logs from the region, certain witness testimonies, investigators' personal notes on military involvement. Even today, some files remain classified by the Russian government. For over 60 years, researchers, scientists, journalists, and amateur investigators have proposed theories to explain the Dyatlov Pass incident. Let's examine the major theories, starting with those that propose natural explanations. Theory 1: Avalanche. This is perhaps the most commonly proposed theory. The scenario: a small avalanche or slab of snow collapsed onto the tent during the night. The hikers, partially buried and sensing more snow coming, cut their way out of the tent in a panic. They fled downhill to escape the avalanche danger zone. In the chaos and darkness, they couldn't return to the tent safely. They tried to survive in the forest but eventually succumbed to cold. The 4 found in the ravine were injured when another snow collapse occurred, crushing them. Evidence supporting this theory. Avalanches are common in the Urals. Could explain the panic, need to evacuate quickly. Could explain the massive chest trauma, being crushed by snow. Could explain why they didn't return to the tent, avalanche danger. Problems with this theory. 1. The tent was still standing. When found, the tent was intact, just cut and partially snow-covered. A true avalanche would have destroyed it. 2. Wrong slope angle. The slope where they camped was approximately 15 to 20 degrees. Avalanches typically require 30+ degrees. 3. The footprints. The footprints leading from the tent were clear and orderly, suggesting no avalanche had occurred after they left. 4. Expert hikers. Igor Dyatlov and his team were experienced. They would recognize avalanche danger and wouldn't camp in a dangerous location. 5. Injury patterns. Avalanche injuries don't explain the missing tongue and eyes, or the specific pattern of rib fractures. 6. The radiation. Avalanches don't cause radioactive contamination. 7. Time delay. If an avalanche occurred, why walk 1.5 kilometers away before stopping? And why walk calmly instead of running? 2019 investigation. In 2019, Swiss scientists modeled an avalanche scenario using modern computer simulations. They concluded a small, slab avalanche was theoretically possible. But even they admitted the model required very specific conditions that may not have existed. Most avalanche experts remain skeptical. Verdict: possible but unlikely. Doesn't explain all evidence. Theory 2, katabatic winds/infrasound. This theory proposes a natural phenomenon caused panic. The scenario: katabatic winds, strong downslope winds, created low-frequency sound waves, infrasound. Infrasound below 20 Hz is inaudible to humans but can cause feelings of dread and anxiety, disorientation, visual hallucinations, panic attacks, irrational behavior. The hikers, affected by infrasound, panicked and fled the tent irrationally. Once away from the source, they realized their mistake but couldn't return due to cold. Evidence supporting this theory. Infrasound has been documented to cause psychological effects. Katabatic winds are common in mountainous regions. Could explain the irrational decision to leave the tent. Explains why they cut the tent, in a panic state, rather than using the entrance. Problems with this theory. 1. The physical injuries. Infrasound doesn't cause broken ribs, crushed chests, or skull fractures. 2. The tongue and eyes. Psychological panic doesn't explain missing body parts. 3. The radiation. No connection between infrasound and radioactive contamination. 4. The organized behavior. Despite cutting the tent, the footprints show organized walking in a group. True panic would be more chaotic. 5. Building a fire. At the cedar tree, they built a fire. This shows rational behavior, not panic-induced irrationality. 6. Lack of evidence. No one has documented infrasound in that specific location with those specific effects. Verdict: could explain the initial departure from the tent but doesn't explain the injuries or deaths. Incomplete theory. Theory 3, paradoxical undressing/hypothermia-induced confusion. This theory focuses on the physiology of hypothermia. The scenario: the hikers left the tent for an unknown reason, perhaps a small avalanche scare, animal, or other minor threat. They planned to return quickly but underestimated the cold. As hypothermia set in, they experienced paradoxical undressing, a phenomenon where freezing people feel hot and remove clothing. They also experienced hypothermia-induced confusion and irrational decision-making. Evidence supporting this theory. Paradoxical undressing is a real, documented phenomenon in hypothermia deaths. Explains why some bodies were found without adequate clothing. Hypothermia causes confusion, explaining poor decisions. The 2 Uris at the cedar tree showed classic hypothermia death positions. Problems with this theory. 1. Doesn't explain initial departure. Why leave the tent in the first place? 2. The injuries. Hypothermia doesn't cause massive chest trauma or skull fractures. 3. Time and distance. They walked 1.5 kilometers before stopping. That's a long distance for people experiencing hypothermia confusion. 4. The fire. They successfully built a fire, requires coordination and mental clarity. 5. Stripping the dead. Taking clothes from the deceased Uris shows rational survival thinking, not confusion. 6. The radiation and missing tongue, no connection to hypothermia. Verdict: explain some behaviors but not the injuries or the initial cause of leaving the tent. Theory 4, animal attack. Some have proposed an animal attack, perhaps a bear. The scenario: a bear or other large animal approached the tent. The hikers fled in terror. The bear followed and attacked some group members, causing injuries. Evidence supporting this theory. Bears and other predators exist in the region. Could explain the fear that caused them to flee. Could explain some injuries. Problems with this theory. 1. Wrong season. Bears hibernate in February in the Urals. 2. No tracks. No animal tracks were found at the scene, and the area was checked extensively. 3. Wrong injury patterns. Bear attacks cause claw marks, bite marks, and torn flesh. These injuries don't match. 4. The radiation. Animals don't cause radioactive contamination. 5. Missing tongue. Bears eat flesh messily. The tongue removal was clean, precise. 6. No predation. None of the bodies showed signs of being eaten by animals. Verdict: extremely unlikely. Evidence doesn't support it. Theory 5. Fighting among the group. Perhaps the hikers fought among themselves, leading to injuries and deaths. The scenario. An argument escalated into violence. Some group members injured others. In the aftermath, guilt and panic caused them to make poor decisions. They fled the tent and eventually died of exposure. Evidence supporting this theory. 9 people in a confined tent for weeks could experience tensions. Could explain some injuries. Could explain irrational behavior. Problems with this theory. 1. Character witnesses. Everyone who knew the group said they were friends with no serious conflicts. 2. The journals. Diary entries show no signs of tensions or arguments. 3. The photographs. Photos taken that day show everyone relaxed and happy. 4. Cooperation evidence. They built a fire together, shared clothes, shows cooperation, not conflict. 5. The specific injuries. Massive chest trauma isn't caused by fist-fighting or even knife attacks. 6. No weapon found. No weapon capable of causing these injuries was at the scene. 7. Doesn't explain radiation. Interpersonal violence doesn't create radioactive contamination. Verdict: no evidence supports this. Inconsistent with all testimony and evidence. Theory 6. Toxic exposure/poisoning. Perhaps the hikers were exposed to a toxic gas or chemical. The scenario. A natural pocket of toxic gas, like methane or carbon monoxide, was released from the ground. The hikers, experiencing symptoms of poisoning, confusion, hallucinations, fled the tent. They died from a combination of exposure and poisoning. Evidence supporting this theory. Toxic gases can cause confusion and hallucinations. Could explain irrational behavior. Natural gas pockets do exist in some geological formations. Problems with this theory. 1. No evidence of gas. No testing showed elevated gases at the site. 2. Wrong geology. The area isn't known for natural gas pockets. 3. Symptoms don't match. Toxic gas exposure causes specific symptoms, nausea, vomiting, respiratory distress, not present in the bodies. 4. Autopsy findings. No signs of chemical poisoning in tissues. 5. Doesn't explain physical trauma. Gas exposure doesn't break ribs or crush skulls. 6. The radiation. No connection between toxic gas and radioactive contamination. Verdict: no evidence supports this. Highly speculative. Theory 7. Stove malfunction/carbon monoxide. The tent had a small portable stove for heating. The scenario. The stove malfunctioned, releasing carbon monoxide into the tent. The hikers, experiencing CO poisoning symptoms, confusion, headache, panic, cut through the tent for fresh air. They evacuated and were too disoriented to return. Evidence supporting this theory. CO poisoning causes confusion and poor decision-making. The tent was small and enclosed, ideal for CO buildup. Could explain why they cut the tent instead of using the door, nearest exit in a panic. Problems with this theory. 1. Stove evidence unclear. Investigators weren't certain if the stove was even used that night. 2. Autopsy findings. CO poisoning leaves specific biological markers, cherry red skin, carboxyhemoglobin in blood. These were not found. 3. Fresh air outside. Once outside, CO effects would diminish rapidly. They had 30 to 60 minutes to recover and make rational decisions. 4. Doesn't explain injuries. CO poisoning doesn't cause crushed chests or skull fractures. 5. Doesn't explain radiation or missing tongue. Verdict: possible contributing factor to leaving tent but doesn't explain injuries or deaths. Theory 8. Falling tree/falling ice. Perhaps something fell on the tent or on the hikers later. The scenario: a tree branch heavy with snow, or a chunk of ice, fell on the tent. Some hikers were injured. The group evacuated. Later, in the ravine, falling ice or snow injured the 4 found there. Evidence supporting this theory. Falling objects can cause blunt force trauma without external injuries. Could explain the crush injuries. Natural and simple explanation. Problems with this theory. 1. The tent location. They camped above the tree line, no trees nearby to fall on the tent. 2. The tent was intact, a falling tree would have collapsed/destroyed the tent. 3. No falling object found, nothing heavy was found on or near the tent. 4. The ravine location. The ravine was also above tree line. What would fall there? 5. Doesn't explain leaving the tent. If someone was injured in the tent, why would everyone flee into the cold? 6. Doesn't explain radiation or missing tongue. Verdict: doesn't fit the physical evidence from the scene. Summary of natural theories. None of the natural explanations account for all the evidence. They might explain leaving the tent, avalanche fear, infrasound, CO, they might explain some injuries, falling snow, pressure, they might explain hypothermia deaths. They don't explain the specific internal injuries with no external marks. They don't explain the radioactive contamination. They don't explain the missing tongue and eyes. They don't explain the organized behavior, walking in a line, building a fire, taking clothes from the dead. This is why investigators, then and now, have struggled with this case. The natural explanations are incomplete. Which leads to the more controversial theories. When natural explanations fail to account for all evidence, investigators must consider more unusual possibilities. These theories range from plausible to speculative to outright conspiracy. Theory 9: Military Weapons Test. This is one of the most credible alternative theories. The scenario: the Soviet military was conducting weapons testing in the region. Possible tests: rocket or missile tests, experimental weapons, pressure weapons, thermobaric devices, acoustic weapons. The test went wrong or was conducted without knowledge of civilians in the area. The hikers were caught in the blast radius or effect zone. The injuries were caused by the weapon. The Soviet government covered it up to hide the military accident. Evidence supporting this theory. 1. Military presence. The region did have military installations and testing ranges. 2. The injuries, pressure weapons, thermobaric bombs, create massive internal injuries without external marks, exactly matching some victims' injuries. 3. The radiation, nuclear components in weapons or nearby testing could explain contamination. 4. The lights, multiple witnesses reported seeing lights in the sky, consistent with rocket or missile tests. 5. Government cover-up, the immediate classification of documents, the pressure on investigators, and the decades of secrecy all suggest military involvement. 6. The panic. If they saw or heard a missile/weapon, they would flee the tent immediately. 7. Geographic evidence. The tent location had a direct sight line to known military testing areas. 8. Historical context. The Soviet Union was actively developing new weapons in 1959, including experimental systems. Evidence against this theory. 1. No debris, no weapon fragments, rocket parts, or shrapnel were found at the scene. 2. Military denial. Soviet/Russian military has consistently denied any activity in that area on that date. 3. Time of year. February isn't typical for outdoor weapons testing due to weather. 4. Selective injuries. Why were only some people injured and others not, if it was a blast? 5. The walking behavior. If there was an explosion, you'd expect more immediate panic and chaos. The footprints show orderly walking. Modern analysis. Weapons experts have analyzed the injuries. Dr. Boris Vozrozdeny, the original medical examiner, stated in a 1990s interview, "The chest injuries of Dubinina and Zolotaryov are consistent with high-pressure trauma. In my career, I've seen similar injuries from explosions. But I was told not to mention this in my official report." A 2000 analysis by British weapons experts concluded, "The injury pattern could be consistent with a pressure wave from a thermobaric weapon or fuel-air explosive. These weapons create a pressure differential that can cause massive internal trauma while leaving skin relatively unmarked. The strongest points. Explains the unusual injury patterns. Explains the government cover-up. Explains the radiation. Explains witness reports of lights. Explains why investigator Ivanov was prevented from pursuing military angles. The weakest points. No physical evidence of weapons testing. No confirmation from military records. Doesn't explain the missing tongue specifically. Verdict, one of the most plausible theories. Could explain most, but not all, of the evidence. The government's secrecy adds credibility. Theory 10, chemical or biological weapons test. Similar to Theory 9 but focusing on chemical/biological agents. The scenario. The military was testing chemical weapons or hallucinogenic agents. The hikers were accidentally exposed. The chemicals caused hallucinations, panic, and irrational behavior. They fled the tent in a paranoid state. Some injuries occurred during their confused wandering. The chemicals may have caused some health effects that contributed to deaths. Evidence supporting this theory. 1. Soviet chemical weapons program. The USSR had an active chemical weapons development program in the 1950s. 2. Explains bizarre behavior. Hallucinogens or panic-inducing chemicals would explain cutting the tent and fleeing into the cold. 3. Explains radiation. Some chemical weapons research facilities used radioactive isotopes as tracers. 4. Government cover-up. Chemical weapons testing would be highly classified and embarrassing to admit. Evidence against this theory. 1. Autopsy findings. No chemical residues were found in tissues, though testing in 1959 was primitive. 2. Symptom mismatch. Known hallucinogens don't typically cause the specific behaviors observed. 3. Injury patterns. Chemicals don't cause crushed chests or fractured skulls. 4. Exposure method unclear. How would they be exposed in a sealed tent? 5. Affects only some. Why would some group members be more affected than others? Verdict. Possible but less likely than conventional weapons. Doesn't explain the physical trauma. Theory 11. Secret military operation/espionage. Some theorists believe the group encountered a secret military operation. The scenario. The hikers accidentally witnessed classified military activity, perhaps a missile test, aircraft test, or covert operation. Military personnel confronted them. Either A. The military killed them to protect secrets, or B. The military scared them away, and they died of exposure. The cover-up was to hide military operations, not to hide murder. Evidence supporting this theory. 1. Semyon Zolotaryov's background. Semyon was a 37-year-old WW2 veteran who joined the group at the last minute. Some researchers have suggested he might have been military intelligence. 2. The radiation could have been from classified equipment or materials. 3. The area restrictions. After the incident, the area was closed to hikers for 3 years, consistent with hiding military activity. 4. Government behavior. The extreme secrecy suggests protecting classified programs. Evidence against this theory. 1. No evidence of other people, only the hikers' footprints were found. 2. The injuries. If military personnel killed them, why the specific injury patterns? Why not just shoot them? 3. Character of victims. These were loyal Soviet citizens, students, and professionals, not dissidents or spies. 4. Inefficient method. If the military wanted them dead, there are far simpler methods than forcing them to freeze. 5. Semyon's background checks out. Extensive research into Semyon's history shows he was indeed a war veteran with a passion for hiking, nothing suspicious. Verdict. Highly speculative. No solid evidence. Relies on conspiracy thinking. Theory 12. UFO/extraterrestrial encounter. This is perhaps the most famous alternative theory, though also the most controversial. The scenario. The hikers encountered a UFO or extraterrestrial craft. The encounter caused them to flee in terror. The injuries were caused by unknown technology or radiation from the craft. The lights witnessed by other hikers were the UFO. Evidence supporting this theory. 1. The lights. Multiple witnesses reported seeing unusual lights in the sky. 2. The radiation, could be from unknown technology. 3. The injuries, could be from unknown weapons or energy sources. 4. Government cover-up. UFO incidents are typically classified by governments. 5. The missing tongue. Some alien abduction accounts mention tissue removal. 6. Investigator Ivanov's statements. In 1990, Ivanov said, "I'm not saying it was aliens, but the lights and the unusual circumstances made me consider possibilities beyond conventional explanations." Evidence against this theory. 1. No physical evidence, no craft debris, no alien technology, nothing unusual found at the scene. 2. Witness reliability. Reports of lights could be misidentifications of natural phenomena, aircraft, or weapon tests. 3. Injury patterns. The injuries, while unusual, are within the realm of terrestrial causes. 4. Occam's razor. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. There are simpler explanations. 5. No other encounters. There are no similar reported incidents in the area before or after. 6. Radiation levels. the radiation found was elevated but within ranges produced by terrestrial sources. Scientific analysis. No credible scientist or investigator with access to the evidence has concluded extraterrestrial involvement. The UFO theory gained popularity because the case is mysterious. Some details seem inexplicable. Human nature seeks extraordinary explanations for extraordinary events. It makes for compelling storytelling. But it's the least supported by evidence. Verdict: no credible evidence. Based on speculation and misinterpretation of facts. Not taken seriously by serious researchers. Theory 13, Combined/Accident Cascade. Some modern researchers propose a cascade of accidents theory. The scenario: multiple things went wrong in sequence. 1. The hikers made a small error, camping on an exposed slope. 2. Weather worsened unexpectedly. 3. Minor avalanche or snow slab shifted, damaging tent. 4. They evacuated as a precaution. 5. In the darkness and cold, they got separated. 6. Hypothermia and poor decisions followed. 7. The 4 in the ravine fell or were buried by snow, causing injuries. 8. The missing tissue, tongue, eyes, was post-mortem decomposition or scavenging. Evidence supporting this theory. 1. Realistic, doesn't require unusual explanations. 2. Accounts for human error, experienced people still make mistakes. 3. Explains the sequence, shows how one bad decision led to another. 4. Explains some injuries, falls and snow pressure in the ravine caused trauma. Evidence against this theory. 1. The specific injuries, even falls don't fully explain the precise chest trauma with no external marks. 2. The radiation, still unexplained in this model. 3. The organized departure, they walked in a line, built a fire, doesn't fit a cascade of panic. 4. Expert opinion, the original medical examiner insisted the injuries couldn't be from falls alone. Verdict: more realistic than some theories but still doesn't fully explain all evidence. Gets closer to the truth but isn't complete. For 60 years, the Dyatlov Pass incident remained officially closed and largely unexplained. But in 2019, something changed. The Russian government announced it was reopening the investigation. Why after 60 years? The reasons for reopening. 1. Public pressure. Families of victims, children and relatives, had campaigned for decades for answers. 2. New technology. Modern forensic and analytical techniques could potentially provide new insights. 3. International interest. The case had become globally famous, putting pressure on Russia to provide answers. 4. Political changes. Post-Soviet Russia was more open to examining Soviet-era mysteries. 5. Approaching anniversary. 2019 marked the 60th anniversary of the incident. The 2019 official investigation. The Russian Prosecutor General's office reopened the case. Led investigators. Andrei Kuryakov, Deputy Head of Regional Prosecutor's Office. Team of forensic experts. Academic consultants from multiple disciplines. Their methodology. 1. Review all original evidence and documents. 2. Re-interview living witnesses, Yuri Yudin and others. 3. Conduct new site inspections using modern technology. 4. Computer modeling and simulations. 5. Consult with international experts. The focus. The investigation focused on 3 main theories. 1. Avalanche. 2. Hurricane force winds. 3. Some combination of natural forces. Notably, they did not seriously investigate military involvement, chemical/biological weapons, UFOs or paranormal explanations. This omission frustrated many researchers who felt the most credible alternative theories were being ignored. The modeling. Swiss researchers Johann Gaume and Alexander Puzrin conducted detailed computer modeling of a potential avalanche scenario. Using modern avalanche simulation software, they modeled the exact slope angle and composition, the snow conditions on February 1, 1959, the weight distribution from the tent, how a delayed avalanche could occur. Their findings, published January 2021. We found that a small slab avalanche, delayed by 9 to 13 hours after the hikers cut into the slope to level their tent platform, was feasible. The slope angle, though seemingly too shallow, could still produce a localized collapse. The chest injuries observed are consistent with a small avalanche of dense snow. The critical details of their theory. Cutting into the slope to level the tent platform destabilized the snowpack. Hours later, wind-loaded snow above created enough pressure. A small but dense slab of snow collapsed onto the tent. This caused the chest injuries to those sleeping in certain positions. The hikers fled because they feared a larger avalanche. The scientific community's response. Mixed. Some experts praised the rigorous modeling. Others noted problems. Doesn't explain why experienced hikers would camp in an avalanche-prone position. Doesn't explain the radiation. Doesn't explain the missing tongue and eyes. Doesn't explain why they walked 1.5 kilometers away. Avalanche danger doesn't extend that far. The model required very specific, unlikely conditions. The 2020 official conclusion. In July 2020, Russian prosecutors officially closed the case, again. Their conclusion. The deaths were caused by a natural phenomenon in the form of a snow avalanche and complications from hypothermia. The official report stated. A small avalanche collapsed onto the tent. The hikers evacuated in panic. Some sustained injuries from the avalanche. They died from exposure and hypothermia. The investigation found no evidence of criminal activity or third-party involvement. The public reaction. Outrage from researchers and families. Many felt the investigation had predetermined its conclusion and ignored evidence. Yuri Yudin, the sole survivor, said before his death in 2013. I don't believe it was an avalanche. I was there. I know that mountain. Igor would never have camped in an avalanche zone. There's more to this story. Researchers pointed out. The conclusion ignored the radiation evidence. It didn't explain the missing soft tissue. It didn't address why the government had classified the case for 40 years. It seemed designed to provide closure rather than truth. The radiation revisited. In 2020, independent researchers obtained permission to test the preserved clothing samples again using modern equipment. New findings. The radiation was confirmed. It was beta and gamma radiation. The contamination pattern suggested it came from a specific source, not environmental background. The levels were consistent with exposure to radioactive materials or waste. Possible sources identified. 1. Occupational exposure. Some victims worked in labs with radioactive materials. 2. Military source. Testing or accidents involving nuclear materials. 3. Contamination during investigation/storage, though protocols make this unlikely. But the 2020 investigation didn't pursue this angle thoroughly, claiming it was incidental and unrelated to cause of death. While the official investigations focused on avalanches, independent forensic experts have conducted their own analyses. Dr. Michael Baden, famous American forensic pathologist. In a 2014 interview, Baden reviewed the autopsy reports. The injuries to Dubinina and Zolotaryov are highly unusual. The force required to break ribs on both sides of the chest is immense. Car crash, plane crash, or explosion. But there's no external trauma, no bruising, no lacerations. This suggests a unique type of force, massive pressure applied uniformly. In my 50 years, I've seen this only in a few contexts: pressure waves from explosions, or compression between surfaces. The tongue mystery, modern perspective. Forensic pathologists have debated the missing tongue extensively. Dr. Emma Brown, UK forensic pathologist, 2018. The missing tongue, eyes, and facial tissue in Dubinina's case could have multiple explanations. Post-mortem, soft tissue decomposes rapidly, especially in water. Small scavengers, even aquatic insects, will consume soft tissue preferentially. The fact that she was in a stream for weeks before discovery makes natural decomposition the most likely explanation. Counter-argument from Dr. Vozrozdeni's original report. The removal appeared to be not random decomposition but specific loss of certain tissues. The tongue was removed at the root, the floor of the mouth was missing. This pattern is unusual for natural decomposition or scavenging. Modern tests on decomposition. In 2015, researchers conducted experiments on animal tissue in similar conditions: frozen stream water, 2 to 3 months exposure. Results: soft tissue does decompose faster than external skin. Scavengers do preferentially consume eyes, tongue, and soft facial tissue. But the specific pattern in Dubinina's case, tongue removed at root, floor of mouth missing, was harder to replicate naturally. Conclusion: possible natural explanation, but unusual presentation. The chest trauma analysis. Modern biomechanical engineers have analyzed the specific rib fracture patterns. Dr. James Mitchell, biomechanical engineer, 2019. Looking at the autopsy diagrams, the rib fractures on Dubinina show a butterfly pattern, ribs broken on both sides, symmetrically. This is characteristic of anterior-posterior compression, being squeezed from front and back simultaneously. This could occur from 1. Being crushed between two surfaces, 2. A pressure wave, or 3. A fall onto a curved surface like a rock. The absence of external trauma rules out most falls. The symmetry suggests uniform pressure applied to the entire chest. Recreating the injuries. In 2016, a Russian research team attempted to recreate the injury patterns using cadavers, donated for science. They tested one avalanche scenario: compressed cadavers under snow weight. Result: could create chest trauma but also caused external bruising and rib penetration through skin. Didn't match the Dyatlov injuries. 2 pressure wave scenario: exposed cadavers to controlled pressure waves. Result: created internal trauma with minimal external marking. Closer match to Dyatlov injuries. 3 fall scenario: dropped cadavers onto various surfaces. Result: created fractures but also extensive external trauma. Didn't match Dyatlov injuries. Conclusion from the research team: the injury pattern most closely matches exposure to a pressure wave or blast overpressure. However, we cannot definitively rule out a unique avalanche scenario with very specific snow density and compression dynamics. The radiation, modern analysis. In 2018, nuclear physicist Dr. Vladimir Borzenkov reviewed the radiation findings. His analysis. The radiation levels found on the clothing, approximately 9,900 counts per minute, is elevated above background but not immediately lethal. For context. Normal background, 50 to 100 cpm. Dubinina's clothing, 9,900 cpm. Lethal exposure, 100,000 plus cpm. This level of contamination could come from 1. Industrial exposure, working with radioactive materials. 2. Environmental contamination from nuclear testing fallout. 3. Direct contact with radioactive materials or waste. 4. Proximity to a nuclear device or reactor. The pattern, concentrated on specific clothing items, suggests direct contact with a contaminated source rather than environmental fallout. Investigation into the victim's occupational exposure. Researchers discovered Semyon Zolotaryov had no known exposure to radioactive materials. Luda Dubinina worked in a laboratory, but not one that used radioactive materials. None of the other victims had occupational exposure. So where did the contamination come from? The theory of contaminated water. One hypothesis, the stream where the 4 bodies were found was contaminated with radioactive runoff from a military facility. Evidence. The region did have military installations. Nuclear waste disposal in the Soviet era was often careless. The bodies were submerged for months in this water. But testing of water from the area in the 1990s and 2000s showed only normal background radiation. The footprints, forensic analysis. Modern forensic investigators have studied photographs of the footprints extensively. Key observations. 1. The spacing, footprints were evenly spaced, suggesting walking not running. 2. The depth, consistent pressure, not the variable depth of panic running. 3. The pattern, single file or small group, organized movement. For the number, 8 to 9 sets of prints, accounting for all group members. What this tells us. Dr. Sarah Thompson, forensic anthropologist, 2020. The footprint evidence suggests the hikers left the tent calmly and deliberately. This contradicts theories of sudden panic from avalanche or explosion. If they were fleeing immediate danger, we'd see running, scattered, panicked tracks. Instead, we see organized walking. This suggests they perceived a threat that was persistent but not immediately deadly, something they were moving away from, not running from in terror. The fire at the cedar tree, modern interpretation. Why did they stop at the cedar tree and build a fire? Dr. Mikhail Ponomarev, survival expert, 2019. The decision to stop and build a fire 1.5 kilometers from the tent suggests a few things. 1. They initially intended to wait out whatever threat they perceived, then return to the tent. 2. The cedar tree location offered some shelter, forest edge, and visibility, could see back toward the tent. 3. They recognized they would die if they didn't create heat. For the fire was their attempt at survival, not a temporary measure. The fact that they broke branches 5 meters up the tree suggests someone climbed to get a view back toward the tent, possibly to see if it was safe to return. The fact they never returned suggests either A. They saw something that prevented their return. B. They became too cold and weak to make the journey. C. The fire went out and they scattered looking for other solutions. Using all available evidence, modern researchers have attempted to reconstruct the timeline of events. February 1, 1959, daytime, established facts. 3 p.m. to 4 p.m., the group reaches the slope of Kholat Syakhl. Weather is deteriorating. Igor decides to camp on the slope rather than descending to the forest. 4 p.m. to 5 p.m., they set up the tent. Photos show the setup process. Everyone appears normal, engaged in camp setup. 5 p.m. to 6 p.m., tent is fully set up. They organize interior, lay out sleeping bags, prepare for dinner. 6 p.m. to 7 p.m., dinner preparation. Someone takes photos inside the tent. Everyone visible appears relaxed. 7 p.m. to 8 p.m., dinner consumed. Songs, stories, journal writing. This is the last well-documented activity. 8 p.m. to 10 p.m., speculation, likely settled into sleeping bags. Storm intensifies outside. This is where the timeline becomes unclear. February 1, 1959, night, reconstruction based on evidence. Somewhere between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., the event. Something happens that causes the group to cut through the tent and evacuate. What we know. They cut the tent from inside using knives. Tent was found with slash marks, knives inside. They exited without taking time to properly dress or gather supplies. They left in an organized manner, footprints show this. They walked toward the forest, staying together initially. Theories about the event. Theory A, avalanche scare. Small snow collapse or sound convinces them avalanche is imminent. They evacuate quickly but calmly, hence organized footprints. They plan to wait in the forest until danger passes. Problem: experienced hikers would recognize true avalanche danger. The slope wasn't steep enough. Why not return when no avalanche occurred? Theory B, military event. They see or hear something related to military activity, lights, sounds, aircraft. They either flee in fear or are ordered away from the area. They believe returning to the tent is dangerous or prohibited. Problem: no evidence of other people at scene. No explanation for the specific injuries. Theory C, carbon monoxide/stove malfunction. CO builds up in tent causing confusion and panic. They cut their way out for fresh air. In confused state, they walk away rather than staying near tent. Problem: CO effects would wear off quickly in fresh air. Why not return after 30 minutes? Theory D, something else. Unknown event causes them to leave. Could be combination of factors. We may never know for certain. 10:30 p.m. to 11 p.m., estimated the group reaches the cedar tree at the forest edge. What we know. They stop here and build a fire. Someone climbs the tree, breaking branches up to 5 meters high. They can see the tent from this location. They gather around the fire. Why stop here? Cold becoming unbearable, need heat immediately. Position allows them to watch the tent, perhaps waiting to see if it's safe to return. Forest edge provides some shelter from wind. 11 p.m. to 12 a.m., estimated critical decisions are made. Scenario reconstruction. The fire burns for a while but is difficult to maintain in the wind and snow. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko are closest to the fire, trying to maintain it. They burn their hands in the attempt. Someone, likely Igor or Rustam, decides they need to return to the tent for supplies. A group makes the decision to attempt the return journey. 12 a.m. to 1 a.m., estimated the group splits. Group 1, Igor, Zina, and Rustam begin climbing back toward the tent. They're inadequately dressed but determined. They believe they can make it. Group 2, the remaining 4, Luda, Kolya Kolevatov, Kolya Thibault-Brignoles, and Semyon decide to seek shelter elsewhere. Why? Perhaps they're too cold to attempt the climb. They see something that makes returning to the tent seem dangerous. They decide to build a shelter in the ravine. 1 a.m. to 2 a.m., estimated tragedies unfold. At the cedar tree, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko succumb to hypothermia. They die beside the dying fire, their burned hands showing their desperate attempts to stay warm. On the slope, Igor, Zina, and Rustam are climbing back toward the tent. It's slow going. The cold is overwhelming. One by one, they collapse. Rustam first, 480 meters from the cedar. Igor second, 300 meters from the cedar. Zina last, 630 meters from the cedar, she made it the farthest. All three die from hypothermia before reaching the tent. In the ravine, the final four reach a ravine about 75 meters from the cedar tree. They attempt to create a shelter in the ravine, using branches and clothing. At some point, they return to the cedar tree and strip clothes from the dead Yuris. The clothes are later found on the ravine victims. But something happens in the ravine. Perhaps a snow collapse or small avalanche buries them. They fall from a height within the ravine system. Something else causes the massive trauma. Luda, Kolya Thibault-Brignoles, and Semyon sustain catastrophic injuries. Kolya Kolevatov's injuries are less severe. They die from a combination of the injuries and exposure. Time of death, forensic estimates. Based on digestive contents and body conditions. The two Yuris, approximately 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Igor, Zina, Rustam, approximately 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. The ravine 4, approximately 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. February 2nd, dawn. By dawn, all 9 hikers are dead. Their bodies lie scattered. 2 at the cedar tree. 3 on the slope between the cedar and the tent. 4 in a ravine, soon to be buried by accumulating snow. The tent remains standing on the mountain, cut open, filled with their belongings. No one knows what happened. February 2nd to 26th. The bodies lie undiscovered. Snow continues to fall, eventually covering the ravine victims completely. The tent slowly becomes buried under snow. February 26th. Search teams find the tent. The mystery begins. After reviewing all evidence, all theories, and all modern analysis, what is the most likely explanation? Most credible researchers today agree on a framework, even if they disagree on specifics. The consensus view. 1. The initial departure from the tent, caused by a genuine threat or perceived threat. 2. The organized evacuation, shows they weren't in immediate blind panic. 3. The deaths, primarily from hypothermia and exposure. For the unusual injuries, require a special explanation. The most likely scenario, 40 to 50% probability. Phase 1, the evacuation. Something caused the hikers to leave the tent quickly but not in complete panic. Most likely causes, in order of probability. 1. Avalanche scare, they heard or felt snow movement, feared larger collapse. 2. Military event, saw lights/heard sounds related to nearby testing, fled out of fear or on orders. 3. Tent damage, small snow collapse partially damaged tent, they evacuated as precaution. They cut through the tent because the entrance was blocked by snow or equipment. Cutting was faster than digging. In cold/dark, slashing fabric was most immediate exit. They walked, didn't run, because the immediate threat had passed, but they feared it might resume. They were disoriented but not in blind panic. They intended to wait in the forest then return. Phase 2, the cedar tree. They reached the forest edge and built a fire. The fire was both for warmth and as a signal/reference point. Someone climbed the tree to observe the tent, checking if safe to return. Phase 3, the split. As time passed and cold intensified, the group made decisions. Group 1, Igor, Zina, Rustam, we have to get back to the tent for supplies. Group 2, the 4 who ended in ravine, were too cold to climb back. Let's find shelter here. The 2 Yuris stayed at the cedar maintaining the fire. Phase 4, the deaths. The Yuris, fire went out, they died of exposure at the cedar tree. Igor, Zina, Rustam, succumbed to cold on the return journey. The ravine 4, this is where it gets complicated. For the ravine injuries, 2 subtheories. Subtheory A, natural. They fell into the ravine in the dark. Or were buried by a small snow collapse in the ravine. Or fell on rocks causing the trauma. The missing soft tissue was post-mortem decomposition over 3 months. Subtheory B, military. While in the ravine, they were exposed to a pressure wave from a distant explosion or test. This caused the internal trauma. This explains the injuries better than a fall. Would also explain radiation and government cover-up. The radiation. Most likely explanation. Occupational exposure before the trip brought contamination on clothing. Or environmental contamination in the ravine stream. Or, less likely but possible, exposure to military materials/tests. Probability assessment by researchers. A 2019 survey of 50 credible researchers, scientists, forensic experts, investigators, who studied the case produced these findings. Primary cause of leaving tent. Avalanche/snow fear, 35%. Military event, 30%. Carbon monoxide, 15%. Unknown/combination, 20%. Cause of the ravine injuries. Fall/snow collapse, 40%. Pressure wave/explosion, 35%. Unknown mechanism, 25%. Government cover-up. Yes, definitely, 45%. Possibly, 30%. No, 25%. Overall explanation. Natural causes, 35%. Natural plus military involvement, 40%. Something else/unknown, 25%. What we can say with confidence. The hikers left the tent due to a perceived threat. They did not intend to abandon the tent permanently. The primary cause of death for most victims was hypothermia. The ravine victims sustained unusual injuries. The government classified information about this case. Some aspect of military activity may have been involved. What remains uncertain? The exact nature of the initial threat, the exact cause of the ravine injuries, the source of the radiation, the explanation for missing soft tissue, why the government kept this secret for decades. The author's opinion, based on evidence review. After reviewing all available evidence, the most probable explanation involves a combination of factors. 1. Initial event, small avalanche or snow slab movement, or perception of such, caused evacuation. The slope angle, while seemingly safe, could produce localized snow movement under specific conditions. 2. The walk to the forest, organized evacuation to a safe distance, intending to return. 3. The decision to split, some returned for supplies, others sought shelter due to cold. For the deaths, primarily hypothermia for the 5 who died on the slope and at the cedar. 5. The ravine injuries, most likely caused by a fall or snow pressure in the ravine, though the specific injury pattern remains unusual. Alternative, pressure wave from distant military test, less provable but explains more. 6. The radiation, most likely from occupational or environmental exposure, possibly with military connection. 7. The cover-up, military was testing weapons in the region, confirmed historical fact. They may have been conducting tests that night. Whether or not military activity directly caused injuries, the government classified the case to hide military operations in the area. Probability, 60% confidence in this general framework. What percentage of the mystery remains unsolved? 40%. We'll likely never have complete certainty about every detail. But we can be reasonably confident about the broad strokes. 9 experienced hikers encountered an unusual situation. They made logical decisions based on incomplete information. A series of unfortunate circumstances led to their deaths. And the Soviet government, for reasons related to military secrecy, classified the investigation. The truth is probably both simpler and more complex than the most dramatic theories suggest. The Dyatlov Pass incident has left an enduring legacy in Russia and worldwide. Cultural impact in Russia. In Russia, the incident has become legendary. Dyatlov Pass is known by virtually every Russian. It's discussed in schools, featured in documentaries, referenced in popular culture. The incident represents something deeper for Russians. The mysterious vastness of the country. The power of nature. The secrets of the Soviet era. The unknowable. Many Russians have visited the site as a kind of pilgrimage. The area, initially closed for 3 years after the incident, is now accessible. Each year, hundreds of hikers make the trek to the site where the tent stood. They leave memorials, flowers, photos, messages. A memorial plaque was installed in 1963, though it was vandalized and replaced multiple times. The current memorial, installed in 2013, reads: To the memory of the Dyatlov Group, Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kalmogorova, Ludmila Dubinina, Yuri Krivonischenko, Yuri Doroshenko, Rustam Slobodin, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, Semyon Zolotaryov. They remain forever in our hearts and in these mountains. Impact on hiking culture. The incident changed hiking culture in Russia. More emphasis on proper equipment and communication. Stricter safety protocols for Category 3 expeditions. Better emergency response systems. Mandatory registration of expedition routes. The Dyatlov Pass incident is studied in mountaineering courses as a case study in survival decision-making. Instructors use it to teach the importance of proper campsite selection. Decision-making under stress. When to evacuate versus shelter in place. Hypothermia recognition and treatment. International recognition. Outside Russia, the case became internationally famous in the 2000s to 2010s due to internet forums and true crime communities. Documentaries, Discovery Channel, History Channel, Netflix. Books, dozens written in multiple languages. Podcasts dedicated to the case. Social media amplification. The case appeals to Western audiences because it combines mystery, adventure, and tragedy. The Soviet setting adds Cold War intrigue. The evidence is just ambiguous enough to fuel endless theories. The victims are sympathetic, young, accomplished, adventurous. In popular culture, the Dyatlov Pass incident has inspired films. The Dyatlov Pass incident, 2013, horror film loosely based on the case. Devil's Pass, alternative title for the same film. Several Russian documentaries and dramatizations. Books. Dead Mountain, The Untold True Story of the Dyatlov Pass Incident, by Donnie Ikar, 2013. Mountain of the Dead, by Keith McCloskey, 2013. Dozens of books in Russian. Video games. References in survival horror games. Kolet, 2015, horror game directly based on the incident. Television. Multiple documentary episodes. Dramatizations in Russia. Dyatlov Pass, Russian TV series, in development. Other media. Songs, poems, artwork. Conspiracy theory websites and forums. YouTube channels dedicated to analysis. The victims remembered. The 9 victims are remembered as heroes in Russia. Each year on February 1st, the anniversary of their deaths, memorials are held in Ekaterinburg, formerly Sverdlovsk. At the Ural Polytechnic Institute, now Ural Federal University, there's a permanent exhibit about the group. Their photographs line a memorial wall. Students learn their names and their achievements. They're remembered not just for how they died, but for how they lived. Igor Dyatlov, the dedicated leader and engineer Zinaida Kolmogorova, the brilliant navigator Ludmila Dubinina, the optimistic adventurer Yuri Krivoniskenko, the passionate photographer Yuri Doroshenko, the practical problem solver Rustam Slobodin, the guitar player who kept morale high Alexander Kolevitov, the quiet meteorologist Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, the endurance athlete Semyon Zolotaryov, the war veteran who loved the mountains. The sole survivor. Yuri Yudin, the 10th hiker who turned back due to illness, lived until 2013. He spent 54 years knowing he should have died with his friends. In interviews over the decades, Yudin said, "I think about them every day. Why did I survive when they didn't? I've asked myself this thousands of times. I don't believe it was avalanche. Igor was too experienced. Something else happened. Something we don't understand yet. But I want people to remember them as the brave, skilled, wonderful people they were, not just as victims of a mystery." Yudin attended every anniversary memorial until his death. He campaigned for the case to be reopened. He gave countless interviews, always defending his friends' reputations and expertise. When Yudin died in 2013 at age 75, he was buried with honors. His funeral was attended by hundreds, including officials, students, and fellow hikers. His tombstone reads, Yuri Yudin, 1937 to 2013. The 10th member of the Dyatlov group. He carried their memory for 54 years. February 1, 1959. 9 young people pitched a tent on the slope of a mountain called Dead Mountain. They were experienced, prepared, and confident. By dawn, they were all dead. What happened in those dark hours remains one of history's most baffling mysteries. Were they killed by an avalanche they should have anticipated? Were they victims of a military accident the government covered up? Did they encounter something we still don't understand? We may never know with certainty. But we know this. 9 brave individuals went into the Ural Mountains seeking adventure and beauty. They found death instead. Their story has captivated the world for over 60 years. Not because of how they died, but because their deaths remind us that nature is powerful, the world is full of mysteries, and even the most experienced among us can fall victim to circumstances beyond our control. The Dyatlov Pass incident isn't just about 9 deaths. It's about the human desire to explore, to push boundaries, to venture into the unknown. It's about courage in the face of nature's power. And it's about the fact that sometimes, despite all our knowledge and technology, we simply don't have all the answers. On Dead Mountain, in the bitter cold of a February night, something happened. Something that caused 9 of the Soviet Union's best and brightest to make decisions that cost them their lives. We've examined the evidence. We've considered the theories. We've analyzed the science. And we're left with a conclusion that's both frustrating and humbling. We don't know. Not with certainty. Not beyond doubt. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains unsolved. But the 9 hikers, Igor, Zina, Luda, Yuri, Rustam, Kolya, and Semyon, will never be forgotten. Their faces stare at us from black and white photographs, forever young, forever frozen in time. Somewhere in the Ural Mountains, Dead Mountain stands silent, keeping its secrets. This is Cold Case Dossier, file number 004. The Dyatlov Pass Incident. 9 hikers. 1 impossible night. 0 survivors to tell the tale. Unsolved. Unforgotten. And forever mysterious. The Dyatlov Pass incident is considered by many to be the world's greatest unsolved mystery. 9 experienced hikers died in circumstances that defy easy explanation. 65 years later, we still don't have all the answers. Was it an avalanche? A military accident? Something else entirely? The evidence points in multiple directions, and the truth remains elusive. If this case fascinated you, here's how you can help keep the investigation alive. Hit that like button. It tells YouTube to recommend this video to others who love unsolved mysteries. Subscribe to Cold Case Dossier for more deep dives into history's most baffling cases. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Comment below with your theory. What do you think happened on Dead Mountain? Avalanche? Military test? Something else? Share this video with anyone who loves mysteries, history, or true crime. The Dyatlov Pass incident deserves to be remembered, not just as a mystery, but as a reminder of 9 brave people who lost their lives pursuing adventure. Next week on Cold Case Dossier, we'll investigate another impossible case, another mystery that has baffled investigators for decades, another story that demands to be told. Until then, remember, the world is full of mysteries. Some will be solved. Others will remain forever in the shadows. The Dyatlov Pass incident may never be fully explained. But we'll never stop searching for the truth. For Igor, Zina, Luda, and the 6 others who died on Dead Mountain. For the families who still seek answers. And for everyone who refuses to accept unknown as a final answer. This is Cold Case Dossier. Stay curious. Stay questioning. And never stop seeking truth, even when truth is hard to find.